This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
So it's bad enough looking at that Sunny. Carl, it's wonderful looking at you. Then there was something else that came up. So I'll say once again, good afternoon to all of you. Welcome. Good to have you here. So we'll be around for quite a while for these sessions. We have 8 sessions, and we have a lot to explore. One thing that I think is important to sort of put us into the zone is to discuss the big band era. And the big band era, sort of officially and historically, is that period from 1935 to 1945. Although big bands were around before that time, but that was the height of it, and that was the popular music for that, by the way, the big band era. So if we're talking about Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, they were the popular. That was a popular sound at the time. People were dancing to it, and the radio stations were playing it, and you could not go to the radio without hearing that big band sound. And also, most of those bands were really jazz bands, but they did not call it jazz. They didn't want to mess around with that word. That word had a very negative connotation. It sort of came from the brothels in New Orleans, and to jazz was to fornicate. So nobody wanted to be identified as a jazz band. So the industry created swing. So swing replaced the word jazz. So most of those bands were swing bands, even if they weren't like Glenn Miller. It's hard to imagine Glenn Miller as a swing band or as a jazz band, but they all had books of music that they called the Hot Book. And there would be a period of time in most concerts, usually later, the second half, where they would put the soft music books away, and then they would come out with the hot books. Benny Goodman was one of the exceptions. He really wanted to be identified as a jazz band if he could get away with it, and he really did not like the idea of playing the softer, sweeter music at all. And also, as most of you know, he was really the first white band to racially integrate his band. By bringing Lionel Hampton in, Teddy Wilson, the great piano player, Lionel Hampton, the vibraphone player, later Charlie Christian. And so they didn't play with the big band, but they played with a small group on the same stage, which was something that just wasn't done at that time. It's hard to imagine these days, but if you look back in history, that's just the way it was. And also the thing that leads us to the description of the course for this time is that all those big bands found that they had to have singers. If they were going to sell what they were doing, people had to hear the lyric, and they had to hear the music in a different way. I remember going to not big band concerts, but not generally that, but sometimes the bands would go on the road for a short period of time, and I was in high school, then college, and so I would stand down in front. I wanted to hear the music, but behind me, people were dancing. so I wasn't one of those guys. And then later, I played with some bands, and for the summer months, I would go on tour with them, and while I was still going to school. And I noticed that was pretty much the pattern. There were people who were standing down in front, watching us, listening to us, and then behind them, people were just swinging their tails off. So I played to the people behind the listeners, and that's what kept me going. And but anyway, the big bands were very popular for that decade, from 1935 to 1945. The end of that era was just a couple of things happened. Economically, it became unfeasible to hire big bands. That's a lot of people. Most of those bands consisted of 16 musicians. Then if you add singers, and then suddenly you're in some cases you're getting up to almost 20 people. And in New York City, they began to add taxes to the number of people that you put on stage. Anyway, it was just sort of eliminated. And the other thing that's very important, at the end of World War II, GIs were coming back, and there was a thing called the GI Bill of Rights. And you could get a loan through a bank with this GI Bill, and you could buy a home. And that was the beginning of the tract homes that we still see in existence today in suburban areas. And suburbia actually came up as a result of that. And so it was just, I think time, as I spoke to people, time to put away the toys and get on with the business. And people were buying homes. You could buy a pretty nice house for $7,500, and on up. And you could have a swimming pool for. I think the first house that I bought was with a GI Bill, and I could have gotten one with a swimming pool for $1,900. Believe it or not. But I didn't. I had enough sense to not do that. But nevertheless, many of you remember those days. When I said 19,000, I should say. But and some of the same homes are still in existence today, from 750,000 on up. You know, and the same houses that there were just basically tract homes. They all looked alike, and they were all just outside of the city, and then people were buying it. So that the big band era sort of ties into all that. And that was the end of that time, and people just had to put away the toys and all the dancing, and also some of the work that had been available during those war years disappeared. Now, the other thing that's very important is that all those bands, as I mentioned, discovered that they had to have singers. That wasn't always a popular thing with the instrumentalists in the bands, because they feel like the singers hadn't really applied themselves the same way. They hadn't had to learn much of anything. But the band leaders quickly discovered that if they had a female singer, that would add a bit of glamour to the band. And even when the singers were not performing, they stayed on stage. The women would sit on a stool, frequently in front of the drummers, and they would play castanets, or they would just sit there to look pretty. They were in gowns most of the time, and they didn't sing that many tunes per show. They might sing three, perhaps a max of 5 tunes, but usually about 3, and then they go back to the stool and then sit there. The other thing is that is very interesting is that those bands were traveling. They were doing what they call one-night stands. And if they were popular, like Benny Goodman as an example, he had to keep traveling across country and doing one night concert stands, concert dances. And so it didn't all go very smoothly. Sometimes the weather would change things up. And the women found that they had to still remain glamorous. They had to put on the makeup, had to change their gowns. They didn't always have hotel rooms in order to pull that off, and so they were rather up against it. On a social level, I think many of you can identify with this part of it. How many times have you heard people say, "Well, why didn't they get married and do exactly what I was talking about? They could have moved to suburbia. Why didn't they go out and get husbands?" And because that's what everybody else was doing. The main thing that the young ladies seem to be thinking about, and guys too, coming out of high school, was getting married, buying one of those homes, or if they were coming out of the military, you could buy the home and so inexpensively with that GI Bill, and settle down, as we used to say, and then sort of get on with life. The women that chose to go with the big bands felt that they were fortunate to be hired in the big bands, and it was also a different way of life. And I think socially, many families and many people were saying that it was just wrong. You know, if they were religious, it was a sinful way to live, and if they were just simply going along with the social mores of the day and the social norm, then people really could not understand why a woman would just give it all up and go with a big band and go out there night after night after night. And were they sleeping with all the guys in the band? Big question. And so sometimes it looked that way. But were they really or if they weren't doing it, then they were pretty damn lonely, weren't they? if they weren't sleeping with the guys in the band. Now, the other thing is that bands had an unwritten law that you really cannot interact physically with the woman that was working in the band, and you can understand why, because that has caused all kinds of problems. Some women defied that and got away with it. Anita O'Day, for one, she was identified as the Jezebel of jazz, so she would go to the guys before they would go to her, and so she had no problem with it, and she didn't give a damn who knew about it. She was there for another reason. Other people like Peggy Lee, as an example, who gained quite a reputation, a good reputation, working with Benny Goodman, defied his house rule by having an affair with the guitarist in the band, and the guitarist was fired. And then she quit because she really did want to raise a family, and so they settled down for a bit, and they had a child, and that didn't work very well. But we'll get into all that. But nevertheless, that was her beginning in the business, working with Benny, and so she defied that interacting rule. Some other bands just didn't really bother with it. They would say that it would sort of take care of itself. Duke Ellington more or less felt that it would take care of itself one way or the other, but he didn't have a really designated singer. When he was working at the Cotton Club in New York, he did for a while, but there are all kinds of different stories. Billie Holiday worked with Count Basie's band, and she was right. She was one of the fellows. She would shoot dice, and she played cards, and she would usually win. And she could talk the same kind of rough talk that the guys talk. She didn't really have any physical relationship with the members of the Count Basie Orchestra, but she was one of the guys. Sarah Vaughan was one of the guys when she worked with the bands with Billy Eckstine's band, and during that period of time, it said she loved to talk salty. Since she could get as salty as any of the guys in the band. She just liked to do it that way. And but she didn't have any affairs with them, but she had affairs outside of the band. And she was always in love with somebody, and it never worked. It never worked out. Annie Ross was another case in point. So it's a pretty long list. Dinah Washington had 7 husbands, but she died at the age of 39. And so why did all this happened in that way, and were the people really satisfied with what they were doing? Most of the people that we are going to define and sort of investigate during the course of these sessions said that they were thoroughly in love with what they were doing, but there was a big gap. There was something that really made them very unhappy because they really couldn't live like other people. And there's a constant question. I don't care how big you got in the business. Ella Fitzgerald, as an example, she was like the first lady of song, but there were people that still wondered, well, why aren't you married? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? It was always the why aren't you doing this? And so that, believe me, that had to get to some people, and to a lot of those women, it was an extra burden that they were carrying as they progressed with their careers. No matter how big they got, they would still have those questions, and people were sort of looking at them sideways and sort of investigating, and then there was the other thing too, maybe they're homosexuals, that too, which was an absolute taboo. You certainly didn't talk about that stuff during that period of time. Some were, so some went to several different ways, and I have to say that from my experience, I don't blame them. Just get the heat off, let's just get this thing out in the open. And also you want a little bit of genuine tenderness. And the guys, of course, are, if a woman is traveling with a band and they're doing all those one-nighters, you got about 18 guys on the bus and 1 woman. And you can believe that after a while, the woman begins to look like a queen, an absolute queen. And so all the guys are hitting on that woman. This is it's a pretty nice little pastime. To get back on the bus, it's nice to have that one person. So most of the women stayed away from that with band members, and that was just a better way to go. I remember when I first began to work in the business as a drummer, and I would work in the summer months, and And then also through school, I would usually have at least one gig. It was help with the scholarship and all that stuff. But there was a lady that was singing with the group that I was working with. And so we would sort of exchange glances here and there, and it looked like maybe something was going to happen. And I was just a kid, and she was older and been around. And she looked pretty good. But remind you, the drummer is just looking from the back. So I mean, every night I'm looking at her and I said, that looks pretty good. And she would turn around, sort of glance at me and smile. And the piano player, who was an older guy, had been around for a while, and so he spotted what was going on. And so he finally pulled me aside one night. And he says, he said, that's not for you, man. He said, you don't want to go there. And first of all, I sort of resented this guy telling me anything about my personal life. But then on the other hand, I began to look at the guy and listen to what he was saying. And so then I did have a chance to talk with her for a while. And actually, the way she started talking scared me to death. And I did realize what he was saying was absolutely true. I didn't know. I didn't know anything about the pressure. I hadn't thought about that, the pressure that these people were under, and also the loneliness, the absolute loneliness. Because even working in a nightclub, you had a couple of different types of women that would come to hear them. In fact, they weren't coming to hear the singers for the most part, unless they were Ella Fitzgerald or Billie Holiday or Sarah Vaughan on that level. But they were suspicious. They generally felt that if a woman was working with a band, that she was sleeping with probably all the band members, or there was something wrong with her if she wasn't doing that. And it was pretty hard for outside women to believe that a woman, a single woman working with a band full of men, was not up to something that just wasn't normal. And so that was an additional pressure. So many of the women that worked with bands, like the woman that I was just describing, at the end of a set or at the end of the night, would just go off on their own. And if we were on the road, they would just go to their hotel room and then stay there. Some drank, some did not. Some got as far as indulging and engaging in drug use. So you do all kinds of things to sort of escape the pressure. But I think there was an additional pressure on these women. In fact, I know there was, that most people just didn't have in their life. So they had to give it up. If they were going for the life of a performer, an entertainer, and a singer, they were going to have to give up an awful lot of other things that most people just did not have to give up. So that's the nature of the chorus. And the title, by the way, is based upon a BBC mini doc that was put together, and is very effective. And so we'll let that be our launching pad, and then we'll go on from there. So let's start taking a look at it, and we'll also break that just before the top of the hour, so we have a little bit of time, and then and hopefully we'll have some time to discuss it. I'd like to hear how your feelings have been through the years about these female performers with these bands, and have you stopped to think about it? So anyway, we have time to just go through it.
Listen.
Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Peggy Lee, and Nina Simone. 5 queens of jazz who helped to forge the soundtrack of American life in the mid-20th century. Creatures of troubled times, but resplendent in their poise, virtuosity, and musical truth, these women triumphed, often at great personal cost, both embodying and transcending their era. From the way they sounded to the way they looked. From the joy of seeing them to the pain of being them, this is the story of the Jazz Queen. These are images of the lost world that paved the way for the great jazz diva, America at the dawn of the 20th century.
All of the great figures who invented jazz and the classic American songbook were born in the same period. They were all born in the 1890s, early 1900s. They grew up listening to the same thing, subject to the same social conditions, reading the same newspapers, hearing the same recordings. But even though they don't know each other and may not be thinking of themselves as one big group, they're all feeding off each other. Have we seen anybody like Ella or Sarah in the last 30 or 40, that's a long time, 30 or 40 years? They belong to their time.
Their time was the mid-30s to the mid-60s, 3 glorious decades that now seem as remote and romantic as the jazz diva herself.
There's certainly something a bit exotic about them. And singing those beautiful songs full of imaginary late-night hangs in speakeasies and telling these wonderful stories.
It was a smoky place because people were smoking, not because there was a smoke machine. And there was a mist in the air because there was sweat and smoke together. And there was a grit and dirt about it. And it was very cabaret.
People still felt the need to believe in something bigger. And you strove to, you had a reason to strive to be better.
It was a golden era of songwriting, a golden era in great bands, and it was a golden era of singers.
Love is just like a faucet. It turns off and on. Love is like a faucet. It turns off and on. Sometimes when you think it's on, baby, it has turned off and gone.
The jazz diva transcends ordinary life. She came into being during the golden age of Hollywood, which is why she looks like a movie star, and why her demise coincided with the death of old Hollywood. But while she reigned supreme, her looks could be as mesmerizing as her voice.
It was all about mystery. And I think mystery is one of the most beautiful things to feed people's imaginations.
That whole glamour thing that happened, it happened from ordinary women up. So if you were in show business and you had photographers, you had that beautiful lighting and black and white and all of the paraphernalia that goes with presentation.
They look magnificent. They're overly made up. Their hair is in a bouffant 6 inches above their heads. They're wearing these sleek, satiny gowns or beaded things. And they're beyond gorgeous.
They're very human, very real, approachable, touchable. Yet better than we are. That's just it.
Nina Simone. She was like a goddess floating through. She literally, at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, she seemed to float up the stairs. She had this gown on. She looked like the Empress from another planet, like from a Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon movie. The elegance, the surreality of it all, and the down-to-earthiness of it all, that was unique. And that was Nina Simone.
The talented female jazz singer wasn't always in control of the way she looked. Sarah Vaughan's early image as just one of the band was radically changed by her label Columbia Records on her way to individual diva stardom.
They're the ones who changed her teeth. They changed her hairline. They're the ones who taught her how to be gowned. They're the ones who put her in the spotlight and told her how to stop being the gawky New Jersey girl who won the Monday night competition at the Apollo, and to be a diva.
My heart's in a dither, dear, when you're at a distance.
But some jazz queens succeeded in creating their own look from the ground up. Peggy Lee's image as a cool, white, sexy screen goddess with a voice was entirely of her own making.
She ended up designing her own gowns, and she knew her figure, she knew what she wanted to look like on stage. She had a strong idea of who she wanted to be, who she wanted this persona of Peggy Lee to be. And she didn't want somebody else to dictate that to her.
Sitting down, wondering what it's all about. You ain't got no money, they will put you out. Why don't you do right, like some other men do? Get out of here and get me some money too.
Behind the glamour of the jazz diva often lurks the potent mythology of a troubled childhood scarred by all kinds of deprivations, hardships, and abuse.
It's a sort of cliche now, isn't it? You know, that well, you know, they early struggles and bad times, and it gives depth to what you do. And I suppose, in a way, it does. Billie Holiday had a dreadful childhood. She was abused. She was in an orphanage. She was farmed out to a madam to clean the... I mean, the worst things happened to Billie Holiday as a child. And people say, you know.
You can't listen to Piaf and not know her early life. You can't listen to Billie Holiday, particularly when she's older and frailer and absolutely not in the space, without knowing that she's a drug addict. You can't do that. You can't separate the information.
Hush now, don't explain. You're my joy and pain. My life's yours, love. Don't explain.
There's a part of me that says, you know, the personal lives of the artists, I mean, you know, for all we know, you know, Brahms may have had a sour stomach, you know, but Billie Holiday, we tend to read into it. But I think that she, like all these other people, was such a great artist that her stuff transcended it.
Thousands of people had horrible childhoods, and they weren't Billie Holiday. They created what they did in spite of it all, not because of it.
Some come from hard backgrounds, of course, but not all of them did. Sarah Vaughan had a quite nice middle-class upbringing, you know, and wasn't too, you know, up against it like, let's say, Ella Fitzgerald was.
Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday were born around the same time. They both had very horrible childhoods. What I don't hear in Ella's voice that was very present in Billie's voice is the pain. Ella suffered, but somehow that did not translate in her delivery.
My fur coat's so low, Lord, ain't it cold? But I'm not gonna holler, 'cause I still got $1, and when I get low, oh, I get high.
Ella Fitzgerald had a very tough start. Her mother died very young. She was in an orphanage. She was running the numbers for the mafia. She ended up in some very, very dodgy situations. So you don't always have to parade your neurotic, awful behavior in this terrible life you've had.
Once Ella gets close to tragedy, to the dark side of Billie, for instance, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't. She's acting. But if it's cheerful, cheerfulness keeps breaking through with her.
That's good. That's good. I lost my yellow basket. Won't someone help me find my basket and make me happy again, again?
Was it red?
No, 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 no.
Was it green?
No, no, just a little yellow basket. A little yellow basket.
The shiny white carapace that was the glamorous facade of Miss Peggy Lee reflected nothing of a childhood spent at the mercy of a cruel stepmother and an uncaring alcoholic father.
That's how she got through her childhood, I believe, is through music and writing songs in her head and singing. She didn't want to talk about her problems on stage, but definitely all of that was there with her when she sang. I couldn't not be.
For all of those women, the important thing was the music. They were in it for the music. Music was the thing that saved them.
They're trying to solve a problem. They're trying to fix something, and they're grasping at straws. And sometimes they must feel like they're falling and they can't grab onto something that will hold them together, and this is the nearest thing.
The effect of years of unhappiness and not having love and not knowing that you really are worth something. It's very difficult to instill that in someone who doesn't feel that.
Annie Ross knew about childhood unhappiness. She arrived on an immigrant ship from Scotland to New York in 1934, only to be left there by her parents in the care of an aunt, the singer Ella Logan. Only 4 years old at the time, Ross was a precocious talent destined not only to discover the work of the great American jazz divas, but also to be a fellow traveler on the jazz highway.
The first time I heard Billie Holiday, the first time I heard Sarah Vaughan, the first time I heard Ella Fitzgerald. It's such a blissful thing to know that you're young and you've got to listen to all these people. It's breathtaking.
Those that have shall get, those that don't shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is news.
I hated being a child. I hated my childhood. I never wanted to be a child. I wanted to be grown and free.
But God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own.
Singing was part of me, and it was the one treasure I had.
If singing offered a way out of a bad situation for a girl with a voice, her best escape route in the 30s and 40s was to join a band, most of which were comprised entirely of men. She might be hired just to be looked at, to be what the band often called the canary.
We keep spending all our time in beauty parlors.
But they were definitely a flower, you know, because people maybe get tired of just hearing that do that hour after hour, blah blah blah. Finally, a singer coming out. She's dressed lovely and.
Most of these singers were not of the musical level experience of the musicians in the band. So I don't think that they cared very much about them. They were a cutie pie, a guy or a girl, they were cute, and the young people came to see them and they sang their song and they got off.
I think the band always was a little bit snooty. You know, the chick singer was a big joke.
The difference was when a Billie Holiday or an Ella Fitzgerald or a Sarah Vaughan, even at their earliest stages, were on that bandstand, I think it became very clear to the musicians that they were dealing with, at the very least, a peer, and for probably many of the musicians, someone who was superior to them.
Ella Fitzgerald, you know, initially people didn't want to hire her because she was overweight and they didn't think she was pretty enough.
she really didn't look that great. Smelled a bit. Her first frock was a whip round from the band.
They said, well, we can't have her. Look at her, look at her. And Chick Webb heard her and he said, yes, but she can sing. Look, we can fix the look. You know, we can fix the look, but we've got to have her.
The Queens of Jazz began their careers with busy swing bands under the control and leadership of famous band leaders such as Benny Goodman, Chick Webb, Count Basie and Duke Ellington. This meant spending months and months touring on the bus.
18 guys in the band and a girl singer. It's 200 one-nighters in a row, some of them. And it was a constant 300-mile trip every night.
Ella Fitzgerald was the life of the party. She was the only girl on a bus with a big, big orchestra-sized bus traveling around, whether it was early Chick Webb when she was 16 or it was Duke Ellington later on, and those guys were working every day, sleeping, sitting up.
How did they present themselves night after night as a figure of glamour? What kind of mental strength and backbone did it take just to get out of bed, look nice after 8 hours on a bus without being able to eat or use the bathroom on the way, and then in a crummy backstage dressing room, if there was a dressing room, probably just the backseat of a bus, apply the makeup, put on the gown, and go and satisfy what these people who came to hear the band wanted to see as the figure of glamour, of sex, of femininity.
Certainly was difficult, but you're young. So riding on a bus with all these guys was great. The really hip guys sat in the back. But I found love there.
Love wasn't the obvious thing to find on a bus full of male musicians running on a tank full of testosterone, bound for jazz glory.
Some girls had reputations, I suppose. She might have done the saxophones first and then the trumpets. Oh, no, start with the rhythm section, wouldn't you say? Yes, if you want a good beat behind your sing.
That was tough. Tough on the girl. Good 18 guys taking a shot at her all the time.
There were guys, sure. I was young, It was quite a combination of music and love. It was a fascinating world. I loved it to bits.
But the fascinating world, tin-canned by the tour bus, would sooner or later have to disembark in those parts of the country where skin color mattered much more than musicianship.
There were still, black toilets, black restaurants. You couldn't go into the white ones. It was kind of embarrassing.
Going to towns where you went in through the kitchen and people spat at you in the street. If you were a black woman, your life was untenable in the South, and if you were a white woman, people thought you were a slut and a whore.
What was it like being a black woman and singing to all these white guys in the audience that, were noisy and rowdy and disrespectful? How did you do that?
They had a sense of expression and a family within the musicians that they worked with. They did have their art as a kind of salve, a kind of balm to heal over it for a time.
If being part of a big band offered the black female jazz singer comfort and protection in a white male world, it was also where she learned about how to be a musician herself.
Ella Fitzgerald, being on the bandstand with Chick Webb every night. Can you imagine what she learned about rhythm from him? Billie Holiday, for 1 year, night after night with the Count Basie Orchestra.
Them that's got shall have, them that's not shall lose. So
night after night hearing that, and also them hearing her.
Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own.
When you sing with a big band and you learn the discipline that goes on in the big band, you're special.
They weren't in charge of their repertoire. The arranger said, I think we'll do this, or the band leader said, why don't we do that? And so, in a sense, they had this quite demanding apprenticeship.
Someone like Peggy Lee, when she got with the Benny Goodman Orchestra in 1941, you know, she wasn't the Peggy Lee or 5 or 6 years later. There was time for her to mature.
You know, when you work with Benny Goodman, if you just keep your mouth shut and watch what's going on, it's a college education. It's 4 years of college with Benny, and that's what she got.
You had plenty money, 1922. You let other women make a fool of you. Why don't you do right?
She was just a member of the band. She was one of the instruments, and she needed to fit in and conform and please Benny.
And get me some money too.
See, Benny said, don't do that. Don't do that. That's the way you do it. He's the boss.
But the power of the big band bosses didn't survive World War II. Nor did the bands themselves, their personnel decimated by military service, the rebuilding of lives after the war, the expense of big band touring, and union trouble. While the men were at war, a new kind of woman had slipped out of the kitchen and into popular entertainment. A woman of dubious virtue, with a troubled past and an uncertain future. Resourceful, independent, even dangerous. The femme fatale. Meanwhile, the hippest sidewalks now marched to the tune of a new kind of jazz called bebop. Modern jazz for a modern age. Perfect for a new kind of modern musical woman, the jazz diva.
After World War II, when the bands died, the singers were liberated, and the really good ones had a glorious decade in the 50s and early, middle 60s. They were all signed to major labels. They recorded with luxurious orchestras and string ensembles. They were backed up by radio. There were jazz clubs around the country. And there were the record companies themselves that knew how to publicize them.
The jazz diva's time had come. Like a film noir heroine, she took center stage, this time in a smaller group of musicians playing more complex music for audiences to listen to. No longer surrounded by 20 guys in a big band whose main job was to get people dancing. Now she was the focus of attention.
With Ella, I think what musicians listen for is the sheer perfection. First of all, the instrument, her diction, and her phrasing.
Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak.
Ella's music came out so perfect, it would be the envy of any composer to be able to write the thing that she sang.
Say, hey, the boy from Ipanema. Say the boy from Ipanema. Say the boy from Ipanema. Ipanema, yes, the boy from Ipanema.
They say that when she first joined Chick Webb's band, she'd come on and she was like completely sort of blank. She would stand there and the music would start and she'd suddenly come to life. And as long as the music was playing, she was animated. She was moving about, she was smiling, waving, and so on. And the music stopped, and she stopped.
Get.
The great jazz divas were able to steal the limelight by virtue of their own very special and private instrument, one that they played inside their own flesh. their voice.
Singing is the most intimate form of music making. Every other musician on the stage has a filter between himself and the audience, and that's the instrument. But the singer is naked. It's all about her insides, her diaphragm, her vocal cords.
It's different from every other instrument because of that. It's inside you. Every part of you goes to making that sound.
The jazz diva is born with her instrument. It's uniquely hers.
They had a good sense of how to make themselves individuals. And that was something that no one could really take from them, and that was where their power was.
And they were copying no one else. They were the beginning. Ella Fitzgerald says that she loved Connie Boswell and wanted to sound like her. So they had people there, I'm sure, Bessie Smith and other blues singers from before their days would have influenced them, but they were trailblazers.
And no one could blaze a vocal trail like Billie Holiday.
Treat me right, baby, and I'll stay home every day. Just treat me right, baby.
You cannot teach someone to sound like Billie Holiday.
I don't know. Billie, what have you done? I don't know, it's just so free and natural, and did she care if she was drunk? No. To imitate her would be folly.
You couldn't stop her and say, oh, you shouldn't be doing it like that, because it was too subtle, it was too cute. Everything has a sheen, a perfection to it, and it seems so carefree and so lazy.
Her tuning was impeccable. She was off her tits most of the time, you know, and her tuning was bang on.
You hear her life, and you hear her truth. I think a lot of people throw out cliches like that, but it's actually true. Truth is what you hear.
With Billie Holiday, you begin with the strange fact that she only has a range of about 12 to 15 notes.
But if you were to look at what she sings written down and then look at the song copy, the notes go up and down like this. Billie just goes like this.
It's the opposite of Sarah Vaughan. Sarah Vaughan could probably have done opera if she'd been born in a different world.
I heard her singing Bali High on an opera version of the musical South Pacific with Kiri Takanawa. I mean, and Sarah's voice is as pure and powerful and beautiful as Kiri's soprano.
Sweet and clear as can be. Come to me, dear, am I? Yes. Come to me.
I wanted to be her manager. But Sarah was of the school that her manager had to be her guy, you know, and that was her school. She always felt that way, and she never found the right guy. I was not interested in being Sassy's guy. I respected her as an artist. I thought she was a beautiful woman, but that wasn't what I wanted. And so that didn't work. Sarah was a great artist who also understood modern jazz, also understood modern harmonies, because she came up through the Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie era. She was their singer.
I don't know why, but I'm feeling so sad. I long to try.
Just about her first record she made, a Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker on it. And it was a bebop record. And in the late 40s, she's singing the sort of thing that most instrumentalists couldn't get at, let alone singers. And she never, ever put a foot wrong.
The jazz divas were able to sing in a way best suited to their individual range and personality because of technical advances in microphone technology. as these sculptural devices became more sensitive, so the jazz voice could become more detailed and powerful, or more conversational and minimal.
Someone like Billie, who came up in the age of the microphone, couldn't belt out loudly, but they could bring it down to like what Marlon Brando did later, which is just to that, you know, that essence of the slightest movement.
No jazz diva embraced the microphone age more than Peggy Lee, whose solo career motto was softly with feeling, which she coupled with method actor minimalism.
Never know how much I care. When you put your arms around me, I get a fever that's so hard to bear. You give me fever.
She kind of toned it down and made it almost conversational and made these rowdy clubs that she sang in come to her.
She's almost purring at you, isn't she? And the sound is so intimate.
Fever in the morning, fever all through the night.
Stillness, and she's just like that. And her hands, she's like still.
You give me fever when you kiss me, fever when you hold me tight. Fever.
Just two pieces, bass and drums. Fever, balloon. That was her arrangement, you know. She would whisper when she sang, and she sang beautiful slow tempos, and she sold the lyrics, and she made you believe it.
Peggy Lee believed that every song was a little story that had to be acted out and stage produced. The person she chose to do this was Miss Peggy Lee, a persona she constructed right down to the last detail.
We would go into the dressing room and she would start a transformation with makeup, with hair, with the costume. And I would watch this person, my grandmother, become Miss Peggy Lee, the star. And then I would run around, go out into the theater and watch her. And it was amazing. I have to say it was amazing for me. And then she'd come off stage and she'd be just high. And then she'd say, "Oh, I'm just famished." And we would go to McDonald's or Carl's Jr. or something, Wendy's.
But Peggy Lee was white. Popping out for a bite to eat after the show hadn't always been an option for those singers who were black, however famous they were. Racism was still at the very dark heart of jazz in America in the 60s. The struggles for African-American female singers were doubly daunting.
Well, they are queens. I mean, they're royalty in American culture, but they're royalty during a fractious time in society, I mean, before desegregation in America. To be a black woman in America before the civil rights and even during the civil rights movement it's got to be something that's unimaginable today.
They'd be people that'd be worshipped around the world and couldn't go into a restaurant in America. This creates tremendous psychological problems.
These ladies experience that even though they are divas, they could be well-known selling, tens of thousands of records, and they're going to have these moments every day.
And if there's trouble in the land, then you got to sing about it. You got to. And that's what these women did.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root.
Those singers can deliver performances that reach a level of emotional uneasiness for the audience that is profound.
Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
Protest music. Jazz has always been protest music, and it's supposed to be.
Sometimes when we listen to Ella Fitzgerald and we hear her sunny disposition, we think that we're not hearing so much of a reflection of the tough times of the eras when we hear someone like Billie Holiday. But I think if we take a step back and think, what did it take for Ella to present that face? I think with all these iconic figures that we're talking about, whether it's Billie or Sarah or Ella, all those great African-American women who were trailblazers, anything and everything that we saw of them on the stage spoke to their condition of the time. Now, this is either by omission, or you have to dig deeper underneath the surface to see these things.
The youngest of our jazz queens found omission impossible. You don't have to dig very far beneath the surface of Nina Simone's music to find the racial indignation of the last of the great jazz divas.
I don't belong here, I don't belong there. I've even stopped believing in prayer. Almost, but not quite.
She took the race issue on in that she actually became involved with the whole civil rights movement. She took it on at a very different level.
Well, that's just the trouble. Too slow. Desegregation. Too slow. Mass participation. Too slow. Unification. Too slow. Do things gradually. Too slow. Will bring more tragedy. Too slow. Why don't you see it? Why don't you feel it? I don't know.
There was a woman who had enough balls to talk about the things that nobody wanted to talk about and do it in a way that it wasn't Entertainment Tonight and it wasn't television. It was real and it was significant.
You don't have to live next to me, love. Just give me my equality, love. Everybody knows about Mississippi. Everybody knows about Alabama. Everybody knows about Mississippi.
Here's somebody with a great talent and a great genius and a great composing genius who took a social stand to the detriment of her pop career. She was being molded to be like a Sarah Vaughan or an Ella Fitzgerald.
It was a song that she sang after the death of Martin Luther King. There was such disgust in her voice. She gets to this lyric, he was not a violent man. He was not a violent man. Now, she could sing it that way. But she sang it, he was not a violent man. I mean, she just squirrels all the juice that she possibly could.
He was not a violent man. Tell me, folks, if you can, just why was he shot down the other day?
The voice is sometimes not beautiful. She's not easy to listen to sometimes. Sometimes she's so in the space of whatever it is she's telling you that there's no distance between the information and you, and it rips your heart out.
And did Martin Luther King just die in vain?
Nina Simone didn't have a choice. Ella Fitzgerald didn't have a choice. They do what they do. So when one tries to figure out, did they trade this off at the expense of that? They didn't have a choice. Nina Simone's voice wouldn't work, her brain wouldn't work, her heart wouldn't beat if she wasn't going to sing Mississippi Goddamn.
Nina. I'd choose Nina over all of them because she was crazy enough to do it and she was sane enough to make it sound right. She was also the kind of woman who, apparently, she'd put a man up to gunpoint to return a pair of shoes, which is pretty crazy. I like that story.
She was proud, but the jazz diva proved that love has no pride. Although she transcended her time, she seemed to be its victim when it came to romance. Behind all the poise was the pain of man trouble, which she endured, like a sacrificial heroine, for those audiences that preferred their jazz divas coloured blue.
Billie Holiday was a masochist. I mean, I think literally a masochist, from what I understand. She chose bad husbands, she chose bad lovers. My next-door neighbor, the late Billy Taylor, told me a story of seeing her beat up once by her manager husband in a club in front of other people.
Even though she has always been reported to be at the very least bisexual, if not often gay, she loved men. She liked having a man in her life. And she chose the worst possible men. I mean, she just chose one thug after another. Sarah Vaughan, whom I knew quite well, did not do a lot better. I mean, she just seemed to choose men who would exploit her.
I'm going to say something that will make a lot of women very unhappy. But all those singers, every one of them needed a man. They needed a man behind them. You need that support. And for a man to take that time to give you that support means he doesn't have his own life. They were taken advantage of. They all ran into problems because these guys looked upon them as meal tickets. And they needed that. I don't know why, but philosophically and psychologically, they needed that.
What's interesting about all of them is the number of times they all get married. There's a big thing going on with marrying a lot. And I think that that's partly because that's a protection, and there's a lot of marrying your musicians.
Peggy Lee's first marriage was to Benny Goodman's guitarist, Dave Barber. They had a child, but that turned out to be only the first of 4 marriages for Peggy, who was likely to greet a husband with the unwelcome news that dinner wasn't ready, but the song was.
She really did want that white picket fence, that dream of an everlasting love and a family. She really wanted that.
Someday we'll build a home on a hilltop high, you and I.
She wanted that dream of the folks who live on the hill. That song was her favorite song. And it's not surprising. It's just about this love that grows old together and stays together.
And we'll be pleased to be called
that, unfortunately, is not what she got. But what she did get was this unbelievable career.
So the choice, life or art, isn't straightforward because what you get from art is life.
Meanwhile, Billie Holiday made private disappointments the very subject of increasingly painful public performances in the unflinching glare of the spotlight.
But I love him. I don't know why I should. He isn't true. He beats me too. What can I do?
I do sing it, and I always say, preface it with saying, well, it's of its time, It's still a great song.
He'll never know. All my life is just despair.
And, sometimes he beats me. It's in the lyric. And, I don't know, I should, he isn't good, he isn't true, he beats me too, but what can I do? Oh, my man, I love him so. And you think...
When
What's the difference if I say?
I always imagine outside the spotlight, the circle of rather blank faced, mild-looking men, rather interested by this, you know. And the women, I think, just think, you know, thank God it's not me.
Or whatever my man is, I'm his.
Well, the question is, what were people, what was it, what was the attraction for people?
Schadenfreude is one of the more disturbing aspects of the human condition, that we get pleasure out of pain, other people's pain.
They're singing the songs, the emotions, and sometimes the solutions to life's problems. They're sometimes solving it, the question, solving the problem for people.
One person has a hard time, and the other person who's sitting in the audience listens to it and hears those words, like Ray Charles, Hard Times, man. My mother told me, before she passed away, said, darling, when I'm gone, don't forget to pray, 'cause there'll be hard times, hard times. Who knows better than I? You know, when he says that, I listen to that and I go, man, well, I soon found out just what she meant. Had to sell all my clothes just to pay the rent. I did that like 8 times in my life. Man, when someone writes a lyric that is real, everybody understands.
I mean, it sounds like you're talking about the Greek Furies all of a sudden, and we're going back to the whole problem of catharsis, you know, so we all need that. We need to believe in these stories in order to purge the pain from our own lives.
Another way to purge the pain from your life was to develop a keen appetite for all kinds of drugs, jazz's default setting in the bad old days.
I think singers in the 50s would be stumbling upon all sorts of stuff going on, you know. Heroin was rife, cocaine, you know, everybody was smoking reefers, everybody. I think you'd have to dodge it to come out unscathed, you know.
In the 30s and 40s, and I've interviewed a lot of musicians on this, the idea that heroin was suicide was not generally known. It really wasn't. People thought that they could take it, and if they exercised a lot and ate well, that it was less dangerous than alcohol.
It's one extreme to the other. You're either really busy or not have anything to do whatsoever. You're teetotal or you're getting drunk out all the time. Loads of different things. It's all just one extreme to the other in most musicians' lives.
As with everything else in the world of the jazz diva, Billie Holiday fulfilled the role of drug addict better than any other jazz queen, with fellow heroin user Annie Ross sometimes on hand to take care of her.
When she was really bad, and when she wasn't, I would go up to her little apartment. I remember I even gave her a bath because she said, I'm too weak. I said, I'll do it. And I would sit by the bed so that as she smoked, she wouldn't burn the place up. And she would watch cartoons. She loved cartoons. And I was happy to do it. I mean, this was my idol.
Did Billie need to be on drugs? Did Lester Young need to be on drugs? Did Charlie Parker need to be on drugs? You know, maybe they did. Maybe they did. Maybe that was part. And all I know is they could play a song and make you cry.
Thank you. And I'd like to do a little tune titled, Please Don't Talk About Me When I'm Gone.
The last time I saw Billie live, her voice was light and ooh, what a little moonlight can do to you, you know. lovable, huggable Emily Brown, Miss Brown. She was singing all those songs.
Please don't talk about me when I'm gone. No, our friendship ceases. Come now.
I says, lady, you sound better than I've ever heard you. And she says, I'm straight now, George. I'm straight. We're talking about drugs. You gotta help me.
It makes no difference how I carry on. I don't.
4 weeks later, she was dead.
Please don't talk about me when I'm gone.
Lady was dead at 44. Long live the lady. She was, of course, the first of the great jazz divas to die on the job. But they all had to face the treachery of their own unique instrument, their body, letting them down.
I know that I'll be contented with yesterday's memories, knowing you'll think of me once in a while.
In the latter years, her highs were getting lower and lower, and her lows were also not there. She was only singing in the middle range of her voice. Ella Fitzgerald, with only this much, sang more than anybody else.
She lived for it. And even though she'd like nearly smoked herself to death and had both her legs amputated and she's wheeled onto the stage, she's still doing it.
Sarah Vaughan had that funny joke. She'd be perspiring, she'd have a drink of water, and she'd say, every night I come up here looking like Lena Horne and I go home looking like Sarah Vaughan. And, you know, so she would make fun of that. She became heavier, she became more diva-like, but she was Sarah Vaughan. And she could get away with that because her genius was so undeniable.
We seem like passing strangers now. How can you hurry by? There were never two who loved half as much as you and I.
Peggy Lee decided to keep Miss Peggy Lee, the performer, alive until the bitter end. You can still be running a fever when you're virtually bedridden.
She arrived in a limousine, and they wheeled out this wheelchair in sequins.
Don't smoke.
Right, it was covered in sequins. And as she came in, she went, thank you for being here, thank you. And they announced Miss Peggy Lee. The lights went down, the lights came back up, and like magic, there she was. Now, imagine this woman having had a stroke, wearing a blonde page boy wig, big glasses with rhinestone, so you were distracted from her face a bit. And she started to sing, Fever. She used to always start with her hand out like that. That always when she started that song. Well, she'd clearly had a stroke. So what they did, they had the drummer play the sound and her hand lightly snapped, but there was the drummer right on time. And when she got to the point where she said, Fever, she held both hands up like that and then brought them down in a series of steps. She no longer had the fluidity or the timing in terms of her hand movements, but still, you learn how you can adjust a performance.
I think it's really hard for a singer to age in front of us on stage. When you're you're a beauty and you're singing about desire and you're trying to be sexy and you're singing Fever and Big Spender and I'm a Woman.
I can wash out 44 pairs of socks and have them hanging on the line. I can start 92 dozen shirts before I can count from 1 to 9.
But then, do you stop? Like, she didn't want to stop singing.
But in truth, it was curtains for the jazz diva by the mid-60s. She was consigned to history by the triumph of pop and rock, leaving her struggling to remain relevant, forced to cover the odd Beatles song. But Nina Simone, who had always embraced every kind of music, made it across the bridge from the lost world of the jazz diva to soul, R&B, gospel, and beyond.
Hey, Lordy, Lordy, Mama, what you gonna do up there? Hey, Lordy, Mama.
There's a lot of singers and a lot of people in the world, but nobody reminds me of Nina.
Tell me what you gonna do now, what you gonna do?
I wish I could have met her and hung with her and gotten in all kinds of trouble with her. That would have been my sister. I'm not in trouble enough. I'd like to be in trouble with Nina Simone.
And don't know how to treat her.
Nina is just a big soul that nobody, I don't even know how they got her into a casket because her soul was so big she didn't have a place to go, you know.
The Ellas, the Sarahs, the Billies, the Dinahs, the Anitas, the Peggys, they become more and more magical because we know we're never going to see their like again.
These women were the first, and they're the originals and the best. And I often wonder why I even bothered doing it, because it's been done so well before. These are women that were artists, and they found a platform to be artists and to be heard and to be accepted and to be subtly, you know, freed.
Me, myself, and I are all in love with you. We all think you're wonderful, we do. Me, myself,
Okay,
and I
great.
have
I'll
just
stop it now.
one point of view.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
go for
okay.
it. So sorry about that, my internet.
Yeah, well, we only lost 5 minutes. So I'll go back to my question. Any comments, any questions from, I was also apologizing for not taking the break. So I will do that again. I'm apologizing. And any questions, any comments before we move on?
Sure, you got it. And don't apologize. I think that that film was enthralling and a great setup for your class. So we have a question here.
Sure.
This came out at the beginning. I think that swing has a particular kind of sound and rhythm that is distinctive as a form of jazz. Can you tell the difference between jazz and swing?
As I said at the beginning, there is no difference. Swing was really jazz, but they didn't want to use the jazz designation because the word jazz came from the brothels of New Orleans. And so the industry thought, well, let's not go that way. So swing was just a replacement for jazz.
Great. Good, thank you. Professor Gahagan asks, Sunny, what do you think of the BBC documentary? Was it fair? Was it accurate? Also, I'm curious to know how you felt about Chick Webb.
Chick Webb was a phenomenal musician. He didn't live very long. He died at the age of 39, but he was reputed to have been one of the greatest drummers out there. And a very interesting comment that he made upon meeting Benny Goodman when they had the challenge of the bands of the Benny Goodman band and the Chick Webb band. So Chick Webb, who was he was handicapped in a way. He had a hunchback and so on, and that's what killed him eventually. And but he said to Benny, he said, "You be the king of jazz downtown." He said, "I be the king of jazz uptown." So, and his band proceeded, according to Gene Krupa, just to wipe those guys out that night. He said, as Gene Krupa said, he said the thing that made it so obvious when the Battle of the Bands was that we were playing the same arrangements. Fletcher Henderson was really the arranger and the guy who created the sound for Benny Goodman. And he had been a big band leader, but he also sold a lot of arrangements and charts to the likes of Chick Webb. So they were really playing the same tunes, same arrangements, but a completely different feeling. But and even Benny admitted later, he was not the sort of a person to admit that it was slaughter that night. It just didn't work out very well. I think the BBC documentary was fair. It's one of those things. If you want to pull that sort of material out, and it's very dangerous. And I think at the same time you really have to be sure to praise these people for the enormous talent that they had and the contribution that they made. But at the same time, it's something that's always it's been there, as I mentioned at the very beginning of today's class, that people are curious about women in music. Even today, if a young lady is saying, "I'm going to be a jazz singer," then the heads sort of turn slowly, and it's sort of like, "Well, what do you mean?" And at that time, when people said that they were going to be jazz singers, it meant that they were just sort of going to disappear for a while. And that's not necessarily true today, but disappearing at that time was going on those endless one-night tours. And they may seem glamorous from the outside, but once you get into it, it's fatiguing for one thing, and also sometimes really demoralizing. I think in the case of many of those singers, they didn't know exactly what they were up to. Billie Holiday was pretty self-sufficient. Ella Fitzgerald was learning on the curve. And by the way, there was a very interesting similarity between the early careers of Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald. They were both incarcerated as young ladies. And in the case of Billie Holiday, she was arrested for prostitution along with her mother. And then she was just a young teenager. Ella Fitzgerald had been living on the street. But prior to that, she was in a home for girls. And then she was sent to a detention center. And she escaped from that detention center and was living on the streets in Harlem. And fortunately for her, she won this talent contest at the Apollo Theater. And then she actually never looked back. She got the job later with Chick Webb. But that's an interesting similarity between those two careers. And so I think that's my answer. And I think the BBC documentary treated them fairly.
Great. Good question. Good answer. We have another question about Chuck Webb. Did Chick Webb help Billy to procure snow? I'm not sure what that's referring to.
No, yeah, I think there's a confusion there. Billie Holiday worked with Count Basie, and Chick Webb hired Ella Fitzgerald, and Ella Fitzgerald. By the way, Ella Fitzgerald was not a smoker, not a drinker throughout all those years, which is pretty unusual because so many of them were. I think that was just sort of the norm. If you're going to be on those endless one-nighters, you're probably going to drink, not necessarily smoke if you were a singer, but a number of them did. Sarah Vaughan was not a heavy drinker, but she drank with the guys. She smoked right to the end, and never lost that wonderful vocal quality that she had, which was one of the most amazing stories out there. I mean, she went for it. Ella Fitzgerald reminds me of a friend of mine, a drummer, and he was a guy who ballooned up to a couple of times up to close to 400 pounds, and he continued to play. But he said, man, when I got to New York, he said, all the guys would take a break and they go out to shoot up a little bit. He said, I go get a pastrami sandwich. So I think Ella Fitzgerald, when the guys were doing all that funny stuff in the back, she would get a meal. So she was constantly battling her weight, and so that was it. So anyway, that doesn't answer your question. I think your question was just a bit off there. As to who supplied the drugs, most band leaders didn't get involved with that, and they were aware. Duke Ellington, as an example, knew that of some guys in his band who were drug users. He called them the Space Patrol, and he just said that they're adults, and he said they'll get here and do the job that they're hired to do, and he just disassociated himself from that. Any more?
Great. Thank you. Yes, we have several coming through.
Sure.
Laverne Simon asks, are there divas that were unknown during this period?
I think one that you saw in the documentary, Annie Ross, is one. Anita O'Day is not unknown because she had a book and she got an awful lot of publicity, and also the great documentary that was done on her. And yes, and there are others. Helen O'Connell, we're not talking about her, and Joe Stafford, who was a fine vocalist. Ivy Anderson, who spent more than a decade working with Duke Ellington, was a great singer, and from Stockton, California, by the way. And then she was another one who could hold her own with the guys, and she didn't take any mess. So she says she was hired to do a certain thing and she got on stage, and if somebody didn't like it, then they were going to hear it probably in a way that they didn't appreciate hearing. But Ivy was quite a performer, and she finally quit the band just because she just tired of being on the road. I mean, a decade working with a big band, that's a long time, and doing all those one-nighters. And so she did it, and she opened a chicken shack place in Los Angeles, and just went into the business and stopped singing altogether. So yeah, there are many singers, and I worked with several singers who I thought were great singers, and they just gave it up. It was easier for some people to just simply say, well, I'm going to get married and start a family. I worked with Peggy Lee, by the way. And one of the interesting things that happened working with her, I worked with her twice. And both times it was just for Las Vegas. And so part of her tenure down there. And then I was vacationing at the time. So, but I could not stay in the same hotel where we were working. So I had to stay on the other end of town where blacks stayed and lived in Las Vegas. But it was interesting. The first time that I worked with Peggy, I think we were at the New Frontier Hotel. And so Peggy invited me up to her suite at the end of the night. So we had a late show. And so I spent 6 hours in her suite listening to her. I mean, there was nothing else going on. Peggy was just going on, just talking about her life and other things. And also she had various lawsuits going, and she was really pretty worked up about that. And so the second time that I went to work for her was a few years later, something very similar. So I was invited up to her suite, and so she went on, and she had been very much in love with Quincy Jones, as she said. But she said I would marry him, but she said he had turned her down. And we know that it would have been the end of both of their careers. It certainly would have been the end of her career if she had married Quincy Jones. But and the guys in the band, when all this was over, kind of just laughed and said, "Well, you got your initiation." Miss Lee, Miss Peggy Lee likes to do that. So, but I also had a second thought. I think that another thing that Peggy may have been doing, she may have been thumbing her nose at the hotel people and the management, and also all of Las Vegas, because by the time I left her suite, this is maybe like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm walking out of Peggy Lee's suite. And so this is her way of just saying, here's how I feel about this segregation stuff. Because they were very reluctant. The second time around, they had agreed to start hiring more people of color in the hotels, doing different jobs outside of maintenance and like cleaning rooms and so on. But they hadn't really liberalized their policy about renting rooms yet. So that was my so both times that I worked with Peggy in Vegas, I still had to stay on the other end of town. Any more questions?
Great, thank you, Sonny.
Sure.
Did Billie Holiday not have a relationship with Webb or even marry him?
No, did not. He took her. No, there was no relationship between Chick Webb and Billie Holiday. It was Ella Fitzgerald and and Chick Webb. Ella Fitzgerald was taken under the wing of Chick Webb and also the family. Chick wasn't that old, but he's certainly been out there for a while. And Ella had nothing. I mean, she didn't have any kind of family. She was a runaway and a truant, and so, and she had also run away from this detention center. So he more or less adopted her. And so when he died, she took over the band, which was not the greatest thing. She was only about 21 years old, and she was only the second female to conduct an all-male orchestra. But Billie Holiday had nothing to do with Chick Webb.
Got it. Thank you. Here's a direct message from me. Snow is the slang for cocaine. And
yeah,
I learned something.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Now I know. Okay. And then I'm getting educated all the time. Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross equals fabulous.
Yes.
Great.
That's and that's Annie Ross. She had this enormous range that we'll get into, and she could imitate a trumpet in a second. Yeah, and sometimes you sort of turn your head and say, "Well, did I hear correctly?" And that is one human voice, and then she had it. It was something rather extraordinary. So we'll get into her life, and she came from Scotland and to the United States, and boy, she had a life. I mean, she really did have a life, and she survived. She just died about 2 years ago. So it's I mean, from her early life, you would say that she probably would not make it to the age of 50, but she went on. And Doris Day is another case in point. I always consider Doris Day as being a jazz singer, and she had sort of a troubled life, even though she had this great success as a film performer and always as a singer. Her singing, I think, was very good, and she sounded like Doris Day. And she didn't really sound like anybody else out there. And she could swing, she could do just about all of it. But boy, her personal life was just tragic. And we don't have to dwell on it, but nevertheless, it's something to always consider. And I think that I think that generally the public was not really helpful. They could have been a lot more helpful for the life and careers of these people. One of the things that was mentioned in the documentary about the segregation and so the additional burden that the African American performers had to carry was while they were on the road was just accommodations and things like food, restroom facilities, and that in itself was just a tragedy. But some of the bands used the women when they went into southern towns, and if they did not have a list of places where they might stay. If they wanted to get some food from a restaurant, most likely the restaurant would give the woman some food to take out and not to sit and eat, but to take out. Whereas they would not necessarily do that with a man. So a lot of the women were used that way. And also when they would get into towns, if they weren't quite sure of where to get lodging, the woman usually could come up with something, whereas the guys couldn't. And boy, that was the stories of those one-nighters were just horrific stories, but also at the same time, funny stories. Ella Fitzgerald was talking about being in Texas with the Jazz at the Philharmonica show, and the police came in during the intermission time, and so everybody was back in with one large dressing room, and they were shooting dice, and she was shooting dice with the guys. So the police said they're going to arrest everybody for gambling, illegal gambling. And this is the show, So there's Ella Fitzgerald downtown, and she's been arrested, and she said all the people were coming in to get her autograph. And Norman Granz comes down in a taxi cab, and he's livid, and he's threatening to sue the city, sue everybody. So they let her go. But she said she never got over. She said, "Here I am. I'm arrested And I'm in the jailhouse, and all these people coming around, they want to get my autograph. Any more questions?
Great. Yes, one more. Ella and Louis Armstrong had many hits. Whose band supported them?
That was just an in-house band that Norman Granz, the owner of Verve Records, put together. And one was Oscar Peterson, who was like the house unit for Verve Records recordings. And he was on just about, I would say roughly 85% of the Verve recordings. So he was a part of that. Louis Bellison, I remember, was a drummer. I think it was Barney Kessel with the guitar. But anyway, it was a house band that was put together for those recordings. And those are fabulous recordings, by the way. If you want a great duet work, go to Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald together. And also they did a wonderful recording of Porgy and Bess. From the outside, you think that maybe well, it's not the greatest idea, but it really worked. It really worked. And that was a full orchestra. Any more?
Yes. No more questions, but just a comment. One student says, I'm having a little trouble thinking of Peggy Lee as a jazz singer.
I think she was one of the best imitators of Billie Holiday. There's no question about that. And that's what she set out to be. If you listen to those early recordings, Why Don't You Do Right as an example, that's Billie Holiday up and down. And then she started writing tunes. But her writing was more pop oriented. Like one of her first hits was a tune titled Manana, and I've forgotten the title of the other one. And I was just thinking about it a short while ago. But she wrote almost 300 sets of tunes and lyrics. She was primarily a lyricist. But yes, she was a jazz singer, but her act was not really like Sarah Vaughan or anything like that, because it was pat. And she really had a certain way that she wanted to present it, and she also did not want to be presented as a jazz singer, but she was. And there were times when she would do, depending on where she was, at Basin Street East, as an example, Peggy could do a set which she did back then that was almost all jazz. But in Las Vegas, nobody really wanted to go on the main stages in Las Vegas as a jazz act. In the early lounges, that's where you would find Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie in the band, Duke Ellington, and so on. And they were just doing straight ahead jazz, or however they wanted to present themselves.
Wow, great detail. Thank you so much. One last question, Sonny.
Sure.
If you have time, or you save it for next time.
Yes, I do. I have time.
You do, great. Okay,
Yeah.
Dean's asking, Gene Kaufman, can you tell the story of Ella getting a room at the Fairmont?
I don't know the story about it, but Ella Fitzgerald, when she started that songbook series, the first one being the Cole Porter songbook. This, by the way, I have to back up a little bit. When she joined forces with Norman Granz, the guy that eventually owned Verve Records, she was things were slipping for her, and she hadn't really taken care of a lot of business. She owed the IRS and so on. And she was also identified pretty much as a jazz singer, but a quirky one. And she did a Tisket a Tasket, and she did a number of other recordings that were similar to that. And so I'm not sure that people were really taking her that seriously. But Norman Granz, who was managing her at the going into the 1940s, mid 1940s, was beginning to think about other ways of presenting Ella Fitzgerald. And one of them was when he started Verve Records, he really started that for Ella Fitzgerald. He thought, why not give her some different material that will create a different and new image for Ella Fitzgerald? And she was skeptical about this. She wasn't really that comfortable with the idea, because she still wanted to be a jazz singer, but also realizing at the same time that this could be a dead-end street. So she decided to go along with his idea. And so he said, we'll do a whole series of Great American Songbook composers. And the first one was Cole Porter. So they did a two record package of the Cole Porter Songbook. And then the idea, the other thing that he was talking with Ella about was, he said, we'll get you out of the saloons. He said that's a dead end street. He said, so let's get in these big showrooms and hotels and so on. Well, the first hotel job that she got was at the Fairmont in San Francisco, and then Norman Granz was pretty tough taskmaster when it came to. He said, so he's not only will we put Ella Fitzgerald on stage. He said, if you want Ella Fitzgerald, then everything else has to open up. All of her fans must be able to rent a room, sit down in the restaurant and eat. And so the Fairmont gave it up for that. So that was the beginning of not only the different career path for Ella Fitzgerald, but for a lot of people, for me included.
Wow. Wow. That's actually a great story on many levels.
It's a very interesting one. Yeah. And Norman Granz he was tough about that. So he had quite a stable of people that recorded under the banner of Verve Records. And so he not only requested, he demanded that first-class treatment for them, no matter where they were performing. And Jazz at the Philharmonic, they called his shows, performed all over the world. But initially, it was the United States coming out of Los Angeles first, but wherever they went, there's no nonsense. So his contracts always had this written caveat, that there would be no discrimination.
Fabulous. Great. Thank you, Professor. I have a last comment here.
Sure.
Professor Gahagan says, terrific session, Sonny, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Oh, good. So am I. And we'll have a break next week. I hope you guys can hang on until then.
We can.
Thank you, Carla.
That was great. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you
We'll see
very
you next
much.
week, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.